No matter how good you think you are, the world moves on without you. And I learned this at 26. And I will say it was a lesson that every time I've gone to make a career pivot, I remind myself that like the train's going to keep on going with or without me. I don't care if you're the CEO. I don't care if you're the co-founder. If you've built something, that people around you will pick it up. It might not be the same, but it'll keep moving.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Inner Wealth, the Forbes Ignite podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Cacal, CEO of Forbes Ignite, and every week I'll be sharing with you my conversations with unique, creative, and innovative people across all different industries. These are people who are intellectually curious explorers who are also redefining what it means to be successful today. From personal to professional, we cover it all to understand what drives our guests to blaze their own trails and create nimble solutions within the industries that touch each of our lives. Our guest today is Ronnie Balog, Division Director, Portfolio Performance Group at the Macquarie Group. She is a U.S. Army veteran and a graduate of the West Point Academy with an incredible journey. I was so excited to speak with her because she always has a lot of gems to share, which changes the way I think about career development and having a purpose-filled life. We talk about everything from the parallels of military leadership to operational excellence, knowing oneself to find your purpose, and having a bias towards action. I know you're gonna love what she has to say. Here's our chat. Hey, Ronnie, thanks so much for being here. It is so great to have you on here, and thank you so much for carving time out of your day.
Well, I'm happy to be here and excited to kind of talk about all things interesting to Forbes Ignite.
So over the past couple of weeks, we've always had such interesting conversations, and you actually got me started on Whole30, for example. So there's a lot to learn from you, and I know that a lot of listeners can learn so much from you and your life and your journey. So I'd love to know, what was your personal and your professional journey to where you are today?
Well, there's a long story here. I'll try to give you my abridged version, and we can double click into anything that sounds enticing or interesting. But I was raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, one of 6 kids. I'm number 4 of 6. And the first 5 of us are women. My baby brother is the only boy and the youngest. But I think that's significant, and I note it as such because I grew up in a family of strong women. And today I work in a predominantly male-dominated field and really always have. A little bit about me. In high school, I have always been a bit of my parents would tell you a troublemaker. I would tell you I always like to push the limits. And I applied in high school speaking very little to no German for this German scholarship to live abroad in Germany. And it was sponsored by the US Congress and the German Congress. And it was an exchange year intended for folks going into college or gap year. So I was young to apply. That said, I was kind of hell-bent on doing this and was selected to do it. And I spent my junior year of high school over in Germany working in this kind of political program. And, you know, it was living abroad, especially at a young age, you grow up so fast. You have to learn how to integrate into other cultures. You have to learn language. I was originally living on a pig farm, which was an experience in and of itself. Yes. And I eventually transitioned families, which there's a whole story there. And I'm still very close with the family that I live with today. That said, I came back from Germany. I had a diamond on my tooth. I had dreadlocks, everything that a parent kind of fears when they let their kid go abroad. I came back from that, and my parents wanted me to get a job and frankly, like clean up my life. And I wanted to do anything but that. And in lieu of getting a job, I decided to volunteer with my grandmother, who was the head of nursing at a veterans hospital. And I think there's these kind of like pivotal moments in life that you don't quite realize are pivotal moments while you're going through them. And I spent that summer volunteering with a bunch of veterans, many of whom were at end of life. And what I thought was really telling was the fact that they consistently talked about their time in the service. And it was this sense of purpose that I was really fascinated with. And I think you can tell a lot about living by people who are close to dying. And after this experience, I was kind of hell-bent then on going to the military. Not really from a military family. My grandfather was in the Korean War and in the Navy, but by no means were we like a family that had significant service. And I should caveat that this is like post 9/11. So, you know, after coming back from living in Germany, I then told my parents I want to enlist in the military. That didn't go over well. It went over almost as well as the diamond on my tooth. And My parents at that point, were a bit shocked. And my grandfather said to me, look, if you go to the military, you're going in as an officer and you should go to one of the service academies. And, a lot of the folks that I went to West Point with had aspirations to do that their whole lives. I was not in that same cohort. I had just kind of learned about the military academies. And for those of you that don't know, you need both a political nomination and admission into the academy itself. So I applied to West Point and I applied for a political nomination and I got both of those. And I showed up at West Point very confused because I had no idea about the hazing that went on, nor did I have a very good grasp of like what it is that you were supposed to do there. And I found many of the things very confusing. I also had so much self-respect that I didn't do well with a lot of the upperclassmen. I would say things like, why are you yelling? Like I had no idea why somebody would yell at me. My ears worked perfectly fine. And I'm sure some of the folks who are a bit older than me at West Point could tell some hilarious stories about the things that I did. But for the sake of the audience, I got great at doing push-ups, lots of push-ups. And I also learned a valuable skill at West Point. Beyond leadership and getting people to do things that you need, is that every organization has an unwritten set of rules that nobody will tell you how to succeed. You have to figure out by looking at what successful people are doing and how you can imitate that. And for whatever reason in the military, how fast you run determines how much respect that you get. Literally. And it's probably true to this day that like your run speed determines what people think about you. And this sounds crazy, but this is one of these informal, unwritten rules. And I picked up on this pretty quickly. I was not a good runner going into West Point, but I trained 2 and 3 times a day running until I could run a 6-minute mile. And I say that because it helped me, it really charted the path for my military career, but it also taught me this concept of every organization has a set of unwritten rules and you have to figure out what those things are. The other thing at West Point is like the more academically sound you are, the better your grades are, the more people relax on other things. And this holds true today. If you're good at one thing, people kind of give you a pass on other things. So I graduated West Point. I became a finance officer. I had aspirations to work in the Pentagon and work on macroeconomics. And instead, I was attached to the 82nd Airborne, which is a paratrooper division. I was sent to go jump out of airplanes, and then I was sent on a plane to Afghanistan. And I spent 16 months in Afghanistan and, did a lot of different projects and spent a significant amount of time trying to build infrastructure and programs in Afghanistan. And I think we all know how that ended. But I came back from that experience and was told that I was going right back over there. And at the time, they were looking for a commander of the Special Forces Qualification Course, which is the selection course for Army Green Berets. I decided to put my name in the hat for that. And then I took that job for 14 months. And this was another area where like running fast and jumping out of airplanes, while it has nothing to do with kind of your leadership capabilities or even how good you are at your job, that organization values a certain set of principles. And, it's what allows you to be successful. And that was one of the hardest leadership jobs for lots of reasons. You have a group of tenured Army Green Berets who don't necessarily want a young woman in charge of them. There was also just, inherent challenge between quality and quantity, a desire to push a high quantity of special operators through the course when, there's always inherent friction between high volume and high quality, right? You can't really have both. And so I did that job. It was one of the most formidable leadership positions and one of the most fun. It's what started off as not fun became the most fun job in the military. I went from there to the Pentagon. I got to work on the Obama budget, which ironically was one of the things I said I wanted to do coming out of West Point. So life always comes full circle. And I lived in DC for a while. I thought I was going to stay in DC and take a job in DC. I later was called back to do what we call Tier 1 operations for the military. And then I got to this point in my military career where one, physically, I was not able to do what I could when I was 20. Imagine that. It was not fun. It was more stress than it was fun. And I always had this kind of like underlying anxiety that I wasn't quite good enough. And I just knew it was time to get out. And I was afraid to quit. And sometimes when you're in like a top organization, it's hard to walk away from success.
Right.
And I think a lot of high performers struggle with this. And not that I'm necessarily a high performer, but like I have certainly been in situations where like I'm good at something, but I don't enjoy it. And the person who had really been an advocate in my career to that point, I was so afraid of telling him that I wanted to quit. And when I finally had that tough conversation, he gave me valuable life advice that I think extends well beyond the military, which is he said, the military is an organization, right? It's think of it like a train. You get on the train at one station, you get off at another station, but don't ever think that you stop the train. And this is kind of like blowback, especially for someone who's pretty high ego. So I left the military. I went to General Electric. The reason I ended up at General Electric is because a lot of successful West Pointers and military folks had been there. I think it's important in an organization, especially if you are a diverse individual, that you look for an organization that has people who look like you in the positions that you want. It's a pretty good indicator that you might be able to get there too. And I love this about General Electric. They had a robust military leadership program. There were senior executives with military backgrounds. And, going back to unwritten set of rules, in a lot of organizations, if somebody who doesn't look like you is in a leadership position to advocate for you, you're not getting to that position. And so again, that's one of the things that I looked for. And I had a very successful time at GE. I was given the opportunity to work across functions, across industries. I left their junior officer leadership program to do something known as the corporate audit staff, which is like internal consulting, strategic growth, and distressed balance sheet audit. I was not particularly good at balance sheet audit, as I'm sure a lot of people from GE could attest. Like attention to detail is not something that I do particularly well. That said, I learned a very valuable skill, which was like hire your gaps and find what you're not good at, be very candid about it, and fill those gaps. I worked on a lot of different projects at GE. I ultimately left the firm because I wanted something different. The culture of the firm was changing, and I think there's enough kind of in the press now around why GE has been split up to substantiate that. But I left GE. I did this kind of women veterans technology tour of New York City. And I found a firm called Movable Inc. And at the time, the CEO said, look, we're trying to scale this thing out. We want to IPO it. So I went to Movable. I became a head of operations, and they gave me more responsibility than I ever deserved. And these, one of the things I'll tell those of you who are in the startup space, and I know a lot of people are, going from big to small, you at least have a framework of what right looks like.
Right.
Any problem somebody gives you, you have a way to think about it. The bad news is, everything looks like a problem, right? And, when I joined Startup Land, there were so many things that I would call them broken. And I'd say, this is broken and this needs to be fixed. And it makes everyone around you feel bad, right? To call these things the broken. And it drives you crazy because you're one person and you can't fix 1,000 things at once. And so you really have to figure out, and I used to call it my fall on your sword list. I'm like, what are you going to fall on your sword for? And I'll give you a great example. Like when I got to Movable, everyone had credit cards, right? And people were spending stuff on their, they would buy stuff on their company card. There was no controls around this. Now, is that a problem? Yeah, it's a problem. Were most people doing the right thing? Yes. Did I make a big deal out of the people who were doing the wrong thing? Absolutely. And so are you going to fall on your sword for company credit cards, right? Maybe not. Are you going to fall on your sword for the snack budget? And so when you fight the small battles, and they're small battles, you lose some of the bigger ones because you lose your credibility. I ultimately left Movable to become the COO of an executive search firm in financial services. And, I will say I learned quite a bit about how decisions are made at the top, especially in finance. And again, between, the boardroom, technology, financial services, all somewhat male-dominated industries, but I've always kind of prided myself in a standard is a standard, right? If you can perform at the same level of your peers and advocate for yourself as much as possible, these things don't tend to be as much of an issue. And I went to be the COO. I took over just building basic metrics, and you'd be surprised in a company how just seeing regular reporting and numbers can shape behaviors.
Right.
I spent a lot of time learning how to structure a partnership and get shared buy-in So when people have equity stake and aligned incentives, they tend to be a little more motivated. And then I ultimately got to this point where I really wanted to go back into heavy operations. I started my career as a paratrooper. You jump in, you infill, you fix, you exfil. That means you get in, fix it up, and get out of there.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do the same thing in the business world. And I went back to the mentors. I went back to the last time that I did what I thought I should be doing, right? This is like really critical, which is like, when was the last time I really enjoyed what I was doing and why did I enjoy it? So I went back to a lot of my mentors from GE, many of whom were actually at Blackstone in private equity operations. And some of them were not, but everyone that I talked to who knew me and knew what I was capable of said to me, like, you need to go find something where you can go in, very rapidly assess, fix it up, and get out of there. That's what you get bored easily. You're very good at pattern matching. You move quicker than 90% of the world. Go do what you're good at. And that's how I ended up in private equity operations. I made a target list of firms that I wanted to go after, just like I would in the military. I used my network and I was shameless about it. I mean, anybody who I thought would talk to me. I actually met you at an event, for Bunker Labs. I went and I leveraged every network that I could to get in front of the right people. And then I ultimately ended up at Blackstone. And, my role at Blackstone was to fix our portfolio companies. So when Blackstone would buy an asset, I would go in, my team, assess what needed to happen, and then decide, will I do the work? Will we outsource the work? And really doing kind of asset management, portfolio ops. And now I am about to start a new role where I'll be doing a similar type of function, building out that functionality for the Macquarie infrastructure and real asset team. So, I would say like the common thread there is figure out what you're good at, figure out how organizations work. And when you find something that you enjoy doing, play your strengths.
Those are words of wisdom. Play your strengths, figure out what you're good at, and figure out what you enjoy doing. And so you've led a long and an illustrious career, and you've gained a lot of operational experience. So I'd love to know, what are some of the commonalities and differences between being an operations executive and your military service?
Oh, there's a lot. So I guess it goes back to what makes a good military leader. And there are certainly lots of examples of what makes a bad military leader. And style always matters, meaning some people will like you and some people won't. But I think there are some tenets of leadership regardless of style. One, I think, is the ability to make decisions. And I tell people, look, if you need a decision to be made, I am your person. Right? If you're cleaning out your house and you don't know what to keep or kill, hire me. I will tell you, right?
I need to hire you right now. I'm in the middle of a move right now. So,
I'm dangerously decisive. And I say dangerous because if you want a decision made, I will make it, even if I only have 60% of the information. Now, in the military, you never had the luxury of 100% information. Ever. And so what makes someone, effective is to make a decision and to be able to pivot if you're wrong. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think is really critical from military leadership is execution, taking orders and making them reality. And so I would say between being able to make decisions, being able to kind of get things done. And the question is, how do you do that? Which is the ability to inspire in others what you need. And that means different things to different people. Some people are inspired by the fact that they get to sleep at night. Some people are inspired by the fact that they actually feel like they're doing good for the world. Some people in the business world are only inspired by money. We call these people salespeople. You got to figure out what it is that drives that motivation, that fires that dopamine, and you got to tap into it. And I think those are the same skills between the decision-making, execution, and inspiration that are very effective in the corporate world as well.
That is such a perfect answer to what I was actually going to ask you about. How should people approach their work to find their purpose and make an impact in their own way?
Ooh, purpose is something that you got to know yourself. I actually think the number one indicator of life success, forget financial success, forget business success, forget relationship success. It distills down to this concept of, do you know yourself and are you honest with yourself? And therein you will find your purpose. So, a lot of people, I think, stay distracted. They stay busy. They keep their calendars full. I would encourage you to not do that, right? Or to take time where you put down the cell phone and you hold off on the brunch plans and just sit with yourself in the quiet. And you'll start to figure out parts of yourself that you might not like, or you might not like the answer to, around what it is that I should be doing. I have a lot of military veterans, and I think this applies to a lot of diverse folks in general. And I say this kind of broad brushstrokes, but like people who grow up who are not financially well off often prioritize money. And it's because you don't have it. We always want what we don't have. And so when I get approached by a lot of military transitioning veterans, they say to me, I want to be a private equity investment professional. And I say to them, why? And I already know the answer to that question, which is somewhere on Google, they found that these people make lots of money, and therefore they think that they should go to a tier 1 MBA program and make lots of money. The reality is the military doesn't pay you much. I think when I got out as a captain, I was making $90,000 a year, right? So like you got shot at for a living for $90,000 a year. You probably aren't motivated by money. And I think it's being honest about what it is that really motivates you. And I say that because if you chase money or you chase something, eventually that motivation is going to putter out. And, you know, in my career, I've never really chased the money. In fact, I've made career decisions that some people would look at and say, like, you're taking a step back. And it's actually like, no, I'm taking a step into what I enjoy doing. And then if you do what you're naturally good at, 1, it doesn't feel like work. 2, you're pretty good at it. And 3, you're going to move 10x faster than anyone else because of those reasons. And I always tell them, I have a lot of people in special operations say, well, I was whatever, a Navy SEAL. Of course I can be an investment professional. I'm like, you can be anything you want. It doesn't mean that like you're going to be great at it. And it also doesn't mean that you're going to get the networking and the connections that people who have been doing this for 10 years longer than you have. So I would say, like, look, to find your purpose, you have to spend time with yourself. You have to be self-aware. And you have to figure out what really does motivate you. And for some people, that's power and title and ego related things. For other people, it's a broader sense of purpose, you know, of like doing good for the world. But if you can get alignment on that, things just kind of fall into place.
That is so inspirational. I'd love to know what inspired you to go into the work that you're doing today, and who are some of your heroes?
Who are some of my heroes? I think the term hero is a bit overused. I don't even quite know myself exactly what it means. There's certainly people that I look up to, and there's no one person that I think is perfect. I'll start there. But there are attributes of different people that I think are admirable. My grandfather, who I mentioned, he recently passed. He was somebody who was just extremely disciplined. He could eat a quarter of a donut. I have never met anybody in my life aside from him that can cut a quarter of a donut and not come back 30 minutes. I'm not talking about you people who like eat a brownie and they cut it into 15 pieces and you eat the whole pan eventually. He could genuinely like enjoy a small piece of something. And like up until his like 70s, he was running every day, even if it was a slight job. So like I admire people who are extremely disciplined. I admire people who are great listeners. Like I think like Barack Obama, for example, is somebody who's just a great listener. If you watch him in interviews, you can see that he genuinely processes information before he opens his mouth to speak. I don't do that, by the way. But I admire it in people. So I think there are different attributes for people. I think anybody who is working in Doctors Without Borders or putting themselves in harm's way, our military, our firefighters, our police officers, people who genuinely understand selfless service, I admire them. I think these are people who are literally risking their lives and making $60,000 or $70,000 a year on a good day. And so I think like that to me is very admirable. That goes back to purpose, right? People who understand, they believe in something bigger than themselves. So I don't necessarily have like what I would call heroes, but there are attributes of people that I admire. And I always try to figure out what it is that I admire about them. And very candidly, it's normally gaps in myself, right? Things that I don't do well that I wish I did better.
So tell me, what are some of the projects you're working on right now that you'd like to talk about? It could be work, personal, or volunteering, anything you want.
Yeah, sure. Well, right now I've been on garden leave for almost 2 months, and it's been wonderful. I started this process very antsy of like, I'm going to lose my edge. I always worry about losing my edge. I don't know if this is just like getting older in life. And so I was like really eager to do what I call side projects. I'm literally like, I love to fix businesses for a living. And so I'm like, hey, you have a business problem, like throw it at me and let me think about it. And so, it was uncomfortable for me to take time off. And, and like I said, when I double click on why that is, I'm afraid of losing my edge. And if I double click on why that is, it's like there's an insecurity there that, you're still not quite good enough. That said, I took 60 days off. In that process, I did Whole 30. And Whole30, for those of you unaware, is I wouldn't call it a diet, but it's a nutrition reset where you just eat whole foods, no sugar, no alcohol, no grain, no dairy for 30 days. It was very challenging, but more importantly, it made me hyper aware of nutrition and looking at how much sugar is in everything. I mean, there's sugar in mayonnaise, there's sugar in canned soup. And if you look at how many issues we have with healthcare today, I think it's directly correlated to the food that we eat. And more importantly, the lack of information, because like I consider myself to be somewhat intellectual and educated. I learned a lot in this process, but also like the expense associated with this. So like not only do most people not know they're eating sugar, the alternative is so expensive that it actually prices people kind of out of the ability to eat. And the counter argument to that, I always address the counter argument. The counter argument to that is like, oh, well, like, you get a bag of apples and it can, it's the same price as a bag of potato chips. It's like, yeah, but when you think about kind of a bag of apples or 3 pounds of apples, whatever, no one's doing that kind of math in their head. And like, there's also an element of like what you are used to eating and changing that behavior. So I've done Whole30. I did that with a friend of mine. I took some vacation, which was good. I went to Mexico. These quiet moments where you kind of get to stop and self-reflect are great. And then I do what I always kind of love to do, which is talk to a lot of transitioning veterans or people who are looking to make their next career move. I'll share this framework in case it's useful for anyone, because I think over my break, about 10 or 15 younger folks that I've mentored through the years tell me that they've been offered jobs because of this job market. I believe in having frameworks for any decision making. It allows you to be dangerously decisive and at least explain what your logic when you are wrong. But there's different reasons why people make different career moves. And I stole this from somebody who gave it to me. But if you look at your career and the jumps you've made, and you prioritize from 1 to 5, the compensation, right? How much people paid you, the title or what they called you, how well this job actually fits your skill set and what you were doing, right? The sense of purpose or desire that you have to do it, or your affiliation with the company and who you work for, right? And you rank those from 1 to 5, you're going to see that like one, it's going to show you what it is that you've been prioritizing and where the gaps are. And I will tell you, if I could go back and tell my younger self this, it's that who you work for matters so much. In fact, the other things will take care of themselves if you are able to find the right person to work for. They will understand how much to pay you. They will put you on a career path. They will figure out what it is that you're good and you're not good at. And so a lot of folks in this market, they're getting outsized salaries, right? You'll get paid a lot of money. And I say, who is the founder of this company, or who's the managing director you're going to work for? What do you think about this man or woman? If you tell me you're going to work for a CEO who's never had a successful exit, historical performance is the number one indicator of future performance, right? So like they might promise you the world. That doesn't mean they're going to get there. So that's kind of the framework that I use to think about how to find your next career move. But I've had that conversation over the last 2 months with quite a few folks. And I find that it's a useful exercise to go through, if only to promote your own self-awareness.
What I'm learning right now, it's that it's in your daily habits that really add up. You talked about Whole30, and you talked about, I remember you were telling me a long time ago that you read a book a week, which is extremely disciplined. So I'm curious, have you ever read the book by Ray Dalio called Principles?
Principles. I have read Principles. In fact, he has a new book out that I want to read around kind of New World Order. I think Ray Dalio is great. I also like Atomic Habits from James Clear. I'm a big fan of James Clear because it's more like digestible and actionable. And I'm also onto this podcast from Andrew Huberman, who's the youngest tenured professor at Stanford. It's called the Huberman Lab. He was a guest for a while on other people's podcasts, but he's a neurobiologist at Stanford, but he provides actionable insights. Like, for example, he says, like, you have for jet lag, you have a few levers, right, to pull. One is exposure to sunlight to change your circadian rhythms. One is your body temperature, which you can either take a cold shower, right? You can go exercise, or you can eat food because that raises your internal body temperature, which is why when you land in a new place, they tell you to get on the local meal schedule. So I'm a big fan of people who don't just pontificate, but actually give you actions, because I clearly have a bias towards action. Yeah, I agree. I think it's habits, but like habits are fun. Like a lot of people say to me, you're so disciplined. And I'm like, One is like, you got to do something until it doesn't feel like it's but anymore. It's part of who you are. I think that's really important. And like, you don't necessarily have to like it. I think there's a propensity to say like, I should be comfortable. And I really don't like, we're hardwired to avoid pain, right? And to enjoy pleasure. But the reality is you don't get better by feeling comfortable. And so like, when you start to feel comfortable in anything in life, your relationship, your diet, your workout plan, your job, you got to stop and ask yourself, like, should I keep doing this, or is there a way to do more?
Yeah. No, that leads me perfectly to my question that I always ask every single one of my guests. And I'm going to tweak it just a little bit for you because you're special.
Sure.
How would you define success, and how would you encourage other people to find their own definitions of success?
I think success comes from what I would call peace and self-love. So when what you think, right, is aligned with your actions, that to me is success, because that is peace. That means like your thoughts and your actions are aligned. How do you get there? We talked about this earlier. I think it's being extremely self-aware. I think it's loving who you are, right, and who you're not. It took me I've gotten feedback in life, and I always ask for feedback. I think feedback is a gift. And like any gift, it can be returned or exchanged, meaning like you don't have to believe it. You just have to hear it, because perception, other people's perception, gives you insight into kind of who you are, or who they think you are, which means you're putting on an image for the world, right? There's like identity, which is who you are. And then there's reputation, which is what you show the world. And you'll certainly get insight from others if you ask for it. That said, I think from your actions align with what you believe, that gives you a sense of peace. That gives you a sense of self-love. And it took me a long time to realize like there are parts of myself that like, are not the best. They're not my best attributes. That said, it's all kind of part of the package. And I think we're all a work in progress. So I think it comes from self-love. It comes from self-acceptance. Some people would tell you, you're high ego, you're full of yourself. There's a great quote from Oprah Winfrey. And she said, I'm a big Oprah fan. Oprah said, people used to criticize me and say that I'm full of myself. And I now respond to them by saying, I absolutely am. So I have enough to give others. And I think
love that.
I think it's so true. I think it's so true. I think when you kind of love who you are and where you are, you're then able to give to others. And that's it really can, I think that leads to a lot of fulfillment in life.
Right. Thank you so much for that. I could not agree with you more, especially with your definition of success. And that quote, that just blew my mind, because that gives you a lot of food for thought. And I just want to thank you so much for such a wonderful conversation, Ronnie. It's always such a pleasure speaking with you. And we definitely have to do this again sometime.
I would love to. Like I said, I think you and I have always so much fun stuff to talk about and ideas to exchange.
Absolutely. So until next time.
All right. Thanks, Nicole.
That's it for this week's episode of Inner Wealth. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and that you'll join us next week as we continue to explore all the ways success is being redefined in our ever-changing world. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite podcast app, and follow us on Instagram at Forbes Ignite for more thought-provoking content and opportunities to engage with us. I'm your host, Nicole Cacal. Thanks for joining us.